gives the green light. Welcome to the State of Literacy Symposium. We're focused on advocacy today, and so excited to have you all. I'm going to jump right in, give a quick welcome so that we can get to it. My name is Brenda Langstraat Palm. If I haven't met you, I would love to. I am the CEO of Working in the Schools WITS, so our offices are just around the corner. Please swing by and check it out. But I'm here today with my Chicago Literacy Alliance hat on. I'm on the board of the Chicago Literacy Alliance, and it is such a pleasure to have you in this space. We've been living here for over 2 years now, right, Mike and Stacy? Yep. And for those of you who don't know, the Chicago Literacy Alliance was founded by Open Books and WITS, so by Stacy Ratner and the executive director of WITS at the time, Janae Myers. Really as a way to bring some organizations together who are doing some work in a school, and we're like, wait, we are all doing work in this school, but we don't know each other, so let's start to get together. And that's what happened. And a very short time later, Stacy and Mike came to us and said, we have this vision for a Literacy Center, this space where we all come together. Maybe we live together and do work together. And I'm like, this sounds like amazing, but also so many things sound amazing that would be great for us, and then they never happen. And in a very short period of time, this happened, and it has changed things for all of us. Who all represents organizations that live in the Literacy Center? Yeah, so you know, I mean, we're getting the work done in the hallways. Everybody's talking about collaboration and collective impact and all these things, right? Like, it is happening in here, and I know we've all experienced it. Some of our organizations have formally collaborated, have merged, and you know, have just felt like more of a community together. So we're grateful to have you in this space. We're going to do a lot of this in the years to come, and it's the people who work tirelessly for the constituents that you're focused on that really make up the Chicago Literacy Alliance. Today, Allison and Jen just shared with me that we are 119 organizations strong as an alliance. So. Yeah, so starting with 2 organizations. You know, many of these organizations, and Commissioner Bannon and I were just talking about this, many of these organizations are straight up reading programs. You know, WITS is one of them. Some of our organizations, we are taking a broader look at literacy, right? Because literacy is broad. It is the foundation of everything. To be literate and to be a literate society is the way that we understand the world. It is the lens that we look through. We understand that foundational reading skills are essential so that we can be literate people. For WITS, that means we're focused on key benchmarks like 3rd grade reading that we know when students are making that transition from learning to read to reading to learn. That is when the world opens up to them. That is when they become literate people, right? And so many of you are working on literacy in so many ways. So I thought when, you know, as we focus on advocacy today, and we are really going to focus on not just advocacy organizations and the work they do in policy change, which is absolutely critical, but also as organizations, how we are advocates for every constituent in our program, even if we're not, quote unquote, like policy advocacy organizations. This is something that WITS has been talking a lot about, and I know that other direct service providers are talking about. So these conversations today are going to be really important. So I thought I'd use Neil Gaiman's words because his are better than mine. The essay that many of you know from 2013 that I think he delivered, now I can't remember where he delivered it, but you all know what I'm talking about. It's a part of the collection of his essays in View from the Cheap Seats. But I thought this makes sense because I know that all of us in the room believe that advancing our city in literacy is not just a matter of like ensuring that everybody can read, but it will make us more empathetic as a city. It is a matter of public health. It is a matter of public safety. It is a matter of our economic engine, you know, as a city. In fact, I know many of you have seen the CEO Business Roundtable report. So the top CEOs in the country are saying that gaps in 3rd grade reading proficiency is impacting our workforce and is a matter of our economic engine and must be addressed. You know, so to be a literate society is also a matter of sustaining our economic engine. So this is what our good friend Neil says about it. Literacy is more important than it ever was. In this world of text and email, a world of written information, we need to read and write. We need global citizens who can read comfortably, comprehend what they are reading, understand nuance, and make themselves understood. So to be literate is to be understood in the world that we live in too. Then he goes on to talk about empathy. Empathy is a tool for building people into groups, for allowing us to function as more than self-obsessed individuals. You're also finding out something as you read that will be vitally important for making your way in the world, and it's this. And these next two sentences are on all caps. The world doesn't have to be like this. Things can be different. So I just wanted to start by saying that, especially as we're focused on advocacy, when we hear about the challenges in our city, the challenges in our country, the challenges in the world, it doesn't have to be like this, right? And we can continue to do the work that we do to impact change. So now I get to introduce somebody who is doing exactly that in our city, Commissioner Brian Bannon. So Commissioner Bannon started at Chicago Public Library in 2012. Just a couple of years later, Chicago Public Library was named as the best public library system in the nation and the third in the world. I started at WITS just around the time that Commissioner Bannon started at the library, and we sat down pretty shortly after we both started. I'm like, man, this guy's for real. An innovator, everything in his bio is about innovation. He's an entrepreneur. But a lot of times our bios say certain things. I will tell you the way that he has supported a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship within the library system is extraordinary. I've worked in government before, and people claim that they're being progressive and innovative, and whatever. But what Commissioner Bannon is doing is creating that culture staff-wide. So he's put together a leadership team, and that has infused this culture throughout the agency. And when you call with ideas, or you want to welcome librarians into the schools that you're working in, or even sometimes far-fetched ideas, because I have plenty of them, and I call his team, and they are open to it and they are welcome. So he has infused this culture, and it has really advanced the public libraries. One thing that he's doing, he's doing work from early childhood ed to adult literacy to, this giant program with teachers in the libraries now. It's the biggest after-school program supporting students. But something really exciting that's happening right now is that the Chicago Public Library and CHA are working together on these new housing developments that are going to include libraries. So kind of infusing, again, a library culture within these housing developments. And I saw him speak recently at a City Club luncheon, and it is just really, really cool stuff. And Chance the Rapper came from the library, so that makes it the coolest ever. You never hear that, Commissioner Bannon. So anyway, with that, I will let Commissioner Bannon say a few words, and again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Brenda. Wow, that was a really nice introduction, and congratulations to the center, to Mike, and to Stacy for creating such an important community in our city. And I've been now in Chicago, I'm almost 6 years. I came to Chicago from San Francisco. Before that, I was in Seattle, and before that, I grew up in a tiny farming community almost to Canada and Washington State. And what I think has been so extraordinary about moving to Chicago, of all the different places that I've lived, the small community that I grew up in was a tight community, was a supportive community. It was a community that had a lot of need. And in my life, I haven't lived in a place other than Chicago that reminds me as much as the tiny little community that I grew up in. And part of that is that I think that our city is really committed to understanding, to pushing and solving the very real problems that we all face together as a society. There's a commitment to working together, and I think that this space here that we're all standing in is a great example of that and shows great leadership, not just within our city but around the country, about how we can, as big players, as small players, as people who care with our minds and our hearts about our communities, that we can come together and actually do something bigger as a collective as opposed to just on our own. And I think this is a great example of that, and it's exciting to be here and be a part of it. I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about libraries and sort of how we see libraries today, but maybe in the context of as you're thinking about your own organizations and the challenges as well as the opportunities that you're facing. And so for me, when I think about public libraries, I've been involved in libraries for almost 20 years. I sort of had an unlikely path. I'm actually, I grew up in a small farming community. I'm also dyslexic, so I was a kid who really struggled to learn to read and write in an early age. Fortunately, I had a mother who was really supportive and helped me get involved in other activities that were linked to building some confidence around learning, so acting and theater, sports, and those kinds of things. But what I didn't realize as a kid that so many of you all know, and I think that we all know as professionals working in this space, that the importance of getting kids ready to learn, ready to read at an early age and building confidence around that is a critical part of building literacy. And so for me, I had that mother, that parent that helped me, and somehow I ended up choosing a career in libraries. But when I was a kid, the library that I grew up with, for all the great things in my small community, it had a pretty one-dimensional aspect to it. I mean, you walked in and it was a great sort of homage to books. So there was rows and rows of books, but I was one of those kids who wasn't ready to read by third grade. I was a kid who was struggling to read at a first grade level when I was in fourth grade. So for me, when I went into the public library, it wasn't a place where I felt that I felt belonging. It wasn't a place that I felt connected to. In fact, I sort of had a lot of anxiety around it because I felt like I was in this space that I was never going to fully understand. I was around all this information, all this knowledge that I wouldn't be able to absorb. So I really was aware at a young age about my inability to consume and to take information. But I had this sort of passion to learn, but there was this big disconnect. And so fast forward many years eventually, as I think many of you know, that if you have a learning disability or a learning difference, you can overcome it, and I eventually did. And so when I was in college, I had a history professor who said, you should really think about going into libraries. And I literally laughed out loud. I was like, you're like, you know that I'm dyslexic, right? I mean, this is not. And she pushed back. And she gave me a little sort of history lesson in libraries. And I'll bring back why I think this is relevant today. Is that she shared with me that the original idea of a public library actually started with Benjamin Franklin almost 250 years ago. And his radical idea at that time was that we needed both sort of traditional education, so like academic institutions that taught in a very specific way. So university systems educate the populace in this very traditional way in order to be a competitive society and a global and information economy. It was interesting to see those early writings, but lesser known is that he also talked about that we needed informal places where people could come together around their shared interests, their ideas, and their passions. And those informal places is where real serendipity, real innovation could happen. That my interest may be in engineering and your interest in engineering, but we come from very different backgrounds, is where real innovation could happen. And so right in the heart of what became the very first public library in the US was not just books, but it was actually a dynamic living laboratory for ideas. And Franklin did many of his most famous experiments with electricity and science right in the heart of that library. And so his big idea was that we needed these public spaces where people could come together, they could learn, they could share their ideas and interests, but in an experiential way, but also in an individualized way. At some point along the way, we lost track of that piece of our mission in public libraries. And so the public library that I grew up in, so I was a kid who was ready to learn, but not ready to read necessarily. But I wanted to be activated, I wanted to learn. But when I walked into the walls of that public library, it certainly aligned with my sister, who was a voracious reader, but it didn't really align with me. I didn't feel engaged there. In my view, the little library that I grew up in wasn't fulfilling its full potential that Franklin really had in mind, so many years before. And so fast forward to today, as we look at the future of our cities, as we look at the future of our communities, the importance of learning and supporting broad base of how people learn, it's really through that context that we look at public libraries today, and certainly how we're looking at public libraries here in Chicago. And so, to that end, I mean, Brenda, you mentioned that Chance the Rapper came out of Chicago Public Library, so to speak. Actually, there's a really interesting story related to this. So Chance went to Jones Prep, which is a few blocks from the Harold Washington Library, and he was suspended from school for 10 days. And on that suspension, he decided he'd mosey on down to the public library and see what was going on. But when he bumped into the library, different from me, when I was younger than him, but when he bumped into the public library, he found something that was there for him. So he was a kid who was interested in music. He was a kid who was interested in writing and poetry. And so when he popped into the public library, there's this digital media lab called UMedia, and there's recording studios in there. There's people who were there to help kids learn how to write. There are folks who were there who were helping kids with their homework after school. There was video production, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when Chance bumped into that space, he was able to align his own interests and passions with something in the public library, and actually famously he did do his first mixtape, his first recording in a recording studio at the Harold Washington Library. But the reason why I think that's important is that today I think that we're pushing a little bit harder on what the true mission of a public library is, creating these radical spaces that not only connect people to information through a more traditional formats such as books, but also are connecting people to each other through experience, that are connecting people to ideas and production through recording studios and maker labs and in an experiential way and across the board. And I think that part of the reason why I think that story is relevant to what we're all talking about today is that what we've had to do within my sort of field, so we're a 140-year-old library here in Chicago, is the tough work of remembering why we're here, what our original idea is, what our mission is, and I think for public libraries our mission is as strong as it's ever been. But sometimes what that means is that the way in which we performed our mission, over the last 140 years may look very different than the way we did that, in year one. And I think for all of us, as we're looking at the impact that we want to have in the city, the work that each of you are doing to support literacy in our city, your mission is strong, and perhaps the way that you need to perform that mission, whether it's through advocacy or whether it's through direct service programs or any other sort of thing, providing direct access can and should evolve over time. And I think for me, and I think for many in my field, we've grappled with that sort of question of how can we stay true to our core values, to our mission, but also make sure that we're pushing ourselves to have the best and the most meaningful impact as we look at our future. And so I know that's a big part of what you guys are talking about today, and I wish I could stay for the whole day and hear the discussion, but I think the space that we are working in together is some of the most important work that a city like ours can focus on, and I think that we're going to be a stronger city because of it. So thank you all for your work and having me open this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Bannon. Hi, everybody. How you doing? I'm Allison Hanold. I'm the program director here with the Chicago Literacy Alliance. I want to thank you all so much for being here. As Brenda mentioned, one of the founding moments for us here at the CLA was simply getting to know each other. So now's the moment to introduce yourselves to your neighbors. Usually the way we do this at the CLA is we go around the room and introduce ourselves and say what we're reading, but I think that would take a little while today. So I hope that you'll just turn to a couple people next to you and just let them know who you are, what brought you here today, and if you want, what book you're reading. Thank you, everybody. I hope that you will continue to connect with one another throughout the day. And just to talk about what we're going to be doing this morning, we are going to be focusing on really understanding the principles of advocacy and collaboration and how they can be incredibly important to really creating real change, especially in the literacy field. And at lunchtime, we are going to have a member fair, so we hope that you will join us in the welcome area where you can meet some of our members, find out what they're up to. We will have a big word game where you can really put your energy to good use. After lunch, we will be having a giveaway. We will be giving out tickets to see Bill Murray perform at the CSO and ticket to see Al Gore speak at the Illinois Humanities Festival. You have to be present to win, so make sure that you're back here after lunch. And then we will have an opportunity to really work together to think about how to put the important elements of advocacy and collaboration to work. So that'll be a really great interactive opportunity for you all to get to know each other a bit further and think about what kind of partnerships can evolve out of today. With that, I want to quickly bring up Robin Koelsch from Communities and Schools Chicago, who's going to be leading that portion of the day, and she is going to give you a sense of what we're going to be asking you to think about throughout the morning.
You got a clicker for me?
Clickety click, click. No, we're just talking about that.
I know, but I had some stuff. It's cool. Yeah. It's cool. I'm Robin Koelsch. I'm with Communities and Schools of Chicago. So right quick, Communities and Schools of Chicago is an organization that focuses on dropout prevention. We do that work in several awesome ways. Basically, one of the great ways that we do that is by utilizing the amazing programs of some of you in the room, and hopefully some more of you after today, to help bring your no-cost programs into our partner schools, of which we have 146 right now. So we are trying to meet school and student need in every way possible, and that directly involves collaboration with organizations, with schools, with students, with teachers. So I'm here today to help us think about what collaboration is. We're going to develop some shared language around collaboration and what that looks like so that we can be talking about it in a very similar way when we're out in these hallways and making these connections at a great place like the CLA. And we're going to do some workshopping through that. So types of collaboration, we're going to workshop through that. We're going to mock collaborate so that we are on the same page of what that means. And then finally, eventually, I'll set you off to do it on your own. So that is what today will look like. I hope that we can continue to have conversations throughout the day, and that if you have questions about what's coming or what Communities in Schools does, please let me know about that. I'll be here all day. So I did want to go over briefly the worksheet that you got, the asset mapping worksheet, or I think I wrote on there collaboration worksheet page 1, which does indicate there's another page, and there is. So you'll see on there that it asks for some basic information, like your organization name. No problem, right? And then the next part says your expertise. So normally when I ask people to say that, like, what are you an expert in? People freak out a little bit, and they're like, I'm not really an expert. Like, I'm good at some stuff, but that's not really my jam. And I want you to embrace your expertise. So you are part of an organization or part of what you do that's not doing it the same exact way as anybody else, or you wouldn't exist. So embrace your expertise and think about what that looks like. And just know that this paper is not going to be collected by anybody or seen by anybody else. So if you write something down and later on you're like, actually, I'm also an expert in, or I think really what I'm an expert in is this, that's fine. Make changes. This is for you to worksheet and workshop through. And then it asks, what's your goal? So what are you trying to do for your constituents? I realize that we don't all serve adults. We don't all serve students. Some of us have really specific audiences we're looking to serve. So what does that look like? So this is like the condensed version, not the version you tell like people that know what you do and can understand your language. This is like you went to a dinner party and your friend's mom was there and she was like, what do you do again? So this is that goal. And then it's followed up by what are the barriers to you reaching that goal better, faster, and more efficiently? How can you impact more people? How can you do your work even better? So think big on that. What are the barriers to doing that? Or think small on that, what that might look like. Maybe you need a space. Maybe you need an awesome speaker to come to your organization to talk about collaboration, just saying. And then the next part talks about what your assets are. So again, think about what you bring to the collaborative table. That could be, and hopefully is, and obviously is for many of you in the room, I have access to a fantastic space called the Literate Center. That is an asset that you have access to. So that's something that you might want to be talking about with people that maybe are here for the first time, or maybe outside of this room that don't know about the Literate Center. Or maybe your asset is, I have 3 awesome teachers that are really good at classroom management for middle schoolers. That's an asset that you bring to the table. So think about that broadly and specifically, but also just in general terms. So think about what those look like. So throughout the day, I hope that you will, as you're getting all this information and hearing from all these amazing humans, that you are thinking about what those things look like and workshopping and editing this document. Mine would be full of scribbles and notes and pictures and stuff, and so I encourage you to make it that way for yourself also. So I'm going to turn it back over to Allison, and I'll see you a couple more times throughout the day. Great, looking forward to it.
Thank you, Robin. All right, and with that, we're gonna get started with the advocacy portion of the day. I'm gonna bring up Dena Giacometti with the Chicago Citywide Literacy Coalition. She's gonna walk us through what advocacy really means, and then she's gonna bring up some panelists who are gonna share with us some examples of collaboration that has worked, or maybe some lessons learned, or that things are getting kicked off now. So here you go, Dena. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you. So I guess when I was getting ready to speak today, I was thinking, how do I find myself in this position being asked to speak about advocacy? So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Virginia, in Hampton Roads, Southeast Virginia. It was black and white. Everything was equal. And a couple Latinos, things were good. And then about 12 years ago, I got my bachelor's in public relations. I was going to be one of the Sex and the City girls. And then about 12 years ago, I moved to Chicago, and I was like, oh, wow, I was really sheltered and privileged. And shit's kind of messed up. So I was bartending, and I was working for the Bears, which actually kind of might be interesting now. But It wasn't interesting at the time, so I was seeing a lot of socioeconomic issues as a bartender, and I thought one of the underlying things that I saw was lack of education, lack of literacy, and so I decided to go back and get my master's in bilingual bicultural literacy. And also at that time, I became a community organizer in my neighborhood for public housing. If any of you know the Lathrop Homes, they're very close to my heart and the community there. And so that's where I really got this kind of advocating roots that find me here today. So in literacy, I think through the budget impasse, I became a leader in the field of literacy because I had been in housing where they're always fighting. And so in literacy, adult educators weren't really used to that. You know, the funding came and it went and it was fine, and maybe one year it was delayed, but nothing like anything we had seen in the budget impasse. So what really shined through was that we needed to be advocates always, no matter if there was a budget impasse or if there wasn't a budget impasse. People needed to know about the work that we were doing. I was in a K-12 classroom in Pilsen as a literacy specialist, and I was working with the kids, and the teacher and I were talking while the kids were working, and this was in Pilsen, so many of the students were native language Spanish speakers, and as a director of an adult education program, I had to tell the K-12 teacher what adult education was. And that was so striking to me because we are partners. At probably 40% of our students come to an adult education program because they want to help their kids with their homework. So how are we partners in this community, but we don't know what each other's really doing? So just to give you, this is kind of like an Advocacy 101 layout so that you can take this back and be advocates for your own organizations and communities. Where does my organization fit? Okay, so what is advocacy? I think that what I've learned over the past several years is that a lot of people, for some reason or another, are scared of advocacy. So it's public support for or recommendation of a particular cause, raising your voice about the wonderful work that you do. I am positive that everyone in this room is passionate about what they do. So some synonyms, since we're literacy people: support for, backing of, promotion of, championing of, argument for, push for. Okay, so use those advocacy synonyms when you're talking about your work and your clients. Now we're going to talk about some activities that comprise advocacy work. Building power at the base. So who are your people? We're all each other's people. That is one of the greatest benefits to this organization. The other piece to that is who are the people most impacted by your work. Your client stories and the successes that you have in the work that you do is probably your most powerful tool, okay? And then who are your allies? So one thing we did not too long ago was we identified the socioeconomic factors that are impacting our students and who are our allies in each of those categories. So when we want to go in and make changes, who can rally around with us on those particular issues? Okay? Educating legislators. Okay, this is one of the most important things. Legislators are elected, so they are very possibly know nothing, like that teacher in the K-12 classroom, about adult literacy. Some of them don't even know that it's GED, citizenship, and ESL classes. Okay, so make sure your legislators know about the work you're doing. Invite legislators to your agency, particularly if you're a direct service organization. Leave a lasting impression. When I formerly was a director, we would have the senator in talking to the students, meeting with students. She used to come to fundraisers, which is another great thing. She came to a mole contest. So, you know, invite them to things that you're doing in the community to build relationships. Very important. Start building the relationships when you don't have an ask. Okay, so that they know who you are when you do have an ask. Research. Ensure that you have relevant information that reflects the stories of your communities and clients. And statistics. There's nothing worse than going into a situation where you have a wrong statistic. Okay, highlight the work your agency is doing. Organize a rally. Okay, mobilize your cause. In case anybody didn't know, this is Adult Education and Family Literacy Week. Okay, so what we're doing statewide is trying to make this week really impactful and really raising awareness to the field. So on Tuesday, this was a quick turnaround for this picture. On Tuesday, we had a rally at the Thompson Center to talk about and bring attention to adult literacy. Public education. Educate the community on the issues. So one thing we did while we're rallying at the Thompson Center was hand out 250 bookmarks to people stopping and like, what are they doing? Why are they always fighting for something at the Thompson Center? Well, now they know what we were doing. So that was the front of the bookmark with the week, and then some statistics on the back. Here are some statistics that we chose that were printed on the other side of the bookmark. 36 million adults struggle with basic academic skills, 500,000 in the city of Chicago alone. So that's 1/6, roughly, of the population of this city struggle with basic academic skills. Okay? Children of parents with low literacy skills have a 72% chance of being at the lowest reading levels themselves. Okay, so adult literacy, that goes back to that story about the K-12 teacher. Adult literacy impacts the whole family. 30% of adults living at or below the federal poverty line do not have a high school diploma. And then highlighted on the bookmark was adult education is the key. So this is for, you know, the economists in our audience. For every dollar spent on adult education services, the community receives $60 in decreased welfare costs, tax revenue, and economic activity. That is a powerful statistic for a legislator. Okay? Another example, T-shirts. Give them out to your clients. They love them. So this says adult education matters, and then those are the 4 core aspects of our work. GED career pathways, adult basic education, and English language. Some other activities that comprise advocacy work: voter education and registration, educational conferences. Consider a conference for your clients so that they're empowered to go out and advocate for themselves. Trainings, litigation, drafting a petition and demands change, writing an op-ed, lobbying. You can lobby. I'll get into that in a minute, but you are allowed to lobby a little bit. Advocacy is the groundwork. Policy is a vehicle to impact systemic change. So one example that I have is think on a small level of a policy at your organization that impacts learners or clients. So one thing that impacted learners at our organization was that students and teachers were not allowed to use YouTube. And YouTube is such a powerful teaching tool. So we had to basically create a mini campaign on why students should be able to access YouTube, especially adult students. I mean, maybe there's bigger issues with kids, but for adult students, we felt like it was very important for them to be able to access that and have abilities to. So do the research. Is there a technological tool that can limit what you can surf and not surf? And then bring that to your ED and say, this policy doesn't make sense for us. How can we work around it? How can we change it? And then if you do those policy changes within your own organization, you'll be all the more ready to do it with the local, state, and federal entities that fund you. Okay. Advocacy versus lobbying. So this is very important. What I found, like I said, is that people are kind of afraid to advocate. Lobbying, as defined by the federal tax law, is any attempt to influence specific legislations. So 2 examples of lobbying: contacting or urging the public to contact policymakers for the purpose of proposing, supporting, or opposing legislation. Lobbying specifically has to do with a bill, okay? By advocating the adoption or rejection of legislation. If you are not talking about a bill, if you're just raising your voice, putting student stories out there, talking about how wonderful your students are, talking about how great your work is to anybody, you are allowed to do that under 501c3 rules. Actually, you can even usually lobby up to 25% of your time. It's almost impossible. I mean, think of your workload, okay, in these organizations. Could you really realistically spend more than 25% of your time calling and talking about bills? No. You'd be living in Springfield. And on your way home from work, if you're working 11 to 7, on your way to work, as a citizen, you can lobby all you want. So you want to call about HB 40, you go ahead and do that. Okay? Resistance. So this is what I hear sometimes too. My organization doesn't support advocacy. The best thing I can say is to start a dialogue with you and your coworkers and your ED. Why not? Do they understand that they can? Do they understand the difference between advocacy and lobbying? Frame advocacy as marketing and advertising of your programs. If you're using student stories to talk about how wonderful your programs are, how many people get clients based on word of mouth? That's the most powerful thing we found when I was in direct service, is word of mouth. So frame your advocacy efforts as marketing of your programs. Consider who is lobbying. You know, are there people within your communities that can do the lobbying for you, if that's something that you sit down and have a chance to talk about? Own it. On my LinkedIn, it says I'm an advocate, okay? Your identity is so important to you, and if you make advocacy part of your identity, if that's who you are. Now, it was easy for me because I was a bartender for 16 years, and I'm really good at it. So I just thought, if anybody gets mad at me, I'll just be a bartender, you know? So I really did own it, and I'm doing okay so far. But a person who publicly supports a cause. If you're passionate about what you do and you encourage others to understand and support your field, consider yourself an advocate. Tell people you're an advocate for that cause. So coming up, we are going to have a panel of advocates and talk about advocacy through collaboration. We'll talk about targeted campaign work, effective forms of advocacy, both policy and grassroots work, and the power of coalition work. Some advocacy quotes. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor. Neutrality spelled wrong. I'm sorry. I fixed it on the Google slide, but it didn't make it. Never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth and compassion and injustice and lying and greed. If people all over the world would do this, it would change the earth. Okay, so our panelists today are right here. Are we going in order? No. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and go down and introduce everyone. I'm Dena with the Chicago Citywide Literacy Coalition, and maybe you don't have to say what you do, but you can. I mean, what the coalition does. You know what I mean. Okay.
Well, my name is Jazmine Salas. I'm the Communications Associate with the Chicago Citywide Literacy Coalition. And I will say that I like to think of CCLC as kind of like the McDonald's supersize of adult education, because we do help adult education groups secure more resources. So.
I need a mic. There we go. Okay, is this on? Yes. Okay, I'm Sarah Labadie with Women Employed. I'm the Senior Policy Associate there. I will say I am most likely to be one of our full-time lobbyists. I am an actual lobbyist, an official lobbyist, and I don't spend nearly 25% of my time on lobbying. So if you are doing it as like a side project of a side project, you're not going to get anywhere near there. But registered lobbyist, that's the word I was looking for. So Women Employed is we turn 45 next year, 45-year-old nonprofit advocacy organization in the city that mobilizes people and organizations to improve the lives of America's working women. And we do that in two ways. One that I'm going to talk about today, but isn't sort of how we connect with the Chicago Citywide Literacy Coalition, is making workplaces more fair. So that's things like increasing the minimum wage, access to paid sick days for all workers in the state and the city, and improving jobs and job quality overall. And then the side of the house that I do a lot more work on is improving access to and success in higher education and training for adult working women who are often going back to school or getting their high school equivalency and trying to move into post-secondary credit programs.
I kind of introduced myself before. Brenda Langstraat Palm. I'm the CEO of Working the Schools, WITS. We deliver literacy programs in 80 elementary schools, all of them neighborhood schools. We're in a couple of charters, but almost solely in neighborhood schools. We just a couple of years ago, the Rochelle Lee Teacher Award Program became part of WITS as an organization. So we're combining world-renowned teacher professional development and our volunteer literacy mentorship programs, which I know many of you are familiar with. We have a core of 1,500 volunteers, which is the largest volunteer core of mentors in Chicago Public Schools. We call our programs literacy mentorship instead of tutoring because it's all the wonderful benefits of mentorship that comes along with reading together. As I mentioned in my welcome, we are not an advocacy organization that focuses on policy change, but we do feel very strongly, especially given the budget challenges in the state and the disinvestment in so many of our students, that we are advocates for every single student in our programs. And we do that through activating this giant volunteer corps and also training teachers at a time where resources are limited when it comes to teacher professional development as well. And much of that professional development that they do have access to is prescribed, is not teacher-led. So that's who we are as an organization. We're able to do all of these things because we're completely privately funded, which is helpful in that the district doesn't see us as vendors and our partner schools don't. We're not vendors to our partner schools, so we don't have to make decisions year over year on which schools we're delivering programs in. We become partners, we become family to our partner schools. But again, the uniqueness of the organization is also that we are solely in neighborhood schools and giving them supports that many of them don't have.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Fred Tsao. I'm the Senior Policy Counsel at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. For those of you who aren't familiar with ICIRR, we're the state's largest multi-ethnic immigrant advocacy organization. We have a core membership of about 60 organizations throughout the state that work with immigrants. Many of them are led by immigrants. We've spent much of our 31-year history working on advocacy issues on the state, local, and federal level, working to improve the lives of immigrants and improve service delivery, change policies, and otherwise try to facilitate the fuller participation of immigrants in the life of their new country. So obviously there's absolutely nothing going on in immigration these days. So I'm just sitting back and eating cookies and watching cat videos at my office. Much of what we do is campaign work, working to pass various proposals on the local level and on the state level, and these days responding to stuff happening on the federal level. But one thing that I should point out that tends to somewhat get neglected is that we also run a couple of state programs. One having to do with language access, and the other having to do with citizenship. These are programs that we, did the intellectual, development work on, and then we work very hard in Springfield to, get the funding for these programs and to keep the funding for these programs. And I suppose I'll be talking about that effort as this panel moves forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering if anyone wants to tell us a little bit about a specific targeted campaign that you've worked on or been a part of recently.
So actually the one I want to talk about, just so everybody in this room actually knows about it, is that we won paid sick days in both Cook County and the city of Chicago, and they went into effect July 1, 2017. So what that means is that every worker in the city of Chicago and some suburbs, although suburbs were able to opt out, so some of the suburbs have opted out, is now covered by paid sick time. That's not just sick time you can use for yourself. You can use it for a family member. You can use it for domestic violence or sexual abuse. You can use it if there's a school closure because of things like the polar vortex. So there are a number of different ways that you can use your time. It's accrued, so it works on an hour. You accrue an hour of sick time for a certain number of hours that you work. It doesn't matter how many employees there are in the company, you accrue that time. It doesn't matter if you work part-time or full-time. So that's a big win for us, and one of the big campaigns I'll be talking about here. We're still working on the state. The city, we were able to pass that here, but we have not quite gotten the state to be on board, although we've been showing movement in the state, so that's a really positive sign as well.
Fred, did you have a specific campaign?
The thing that we're probably best known for these days is passing the Illinois Trust Act. I'm not going to talk about that. Instead, I'm going to talk about something that may be more analogous to, advocacy regarding adult literacy funding, and that is the efforts that I alluded to earlier to maintain funding for immigrant services funding. This is something that we have to contend with the General Assembly, over and over again every single year, it seems. For the most part, we've been able to build fairly strong bipartisan support in both chambers of the General Assembly. Having said that, it's not a risk-free environment. We can't coast. And there have been a couple of occasions when we've been cut severely, if not zeroed out. Who zeroed us out. We've been, this funding helps sustain, 60 community organizations throughout the state, many of whom rely, for better or worse, fairly heavily on state grant funding. And, so with the budget impasse specifically over the last couple of years, quite a number of these programs were existentially threatened. They would have shut their doors if not for the efforts to maintain and restore state program funding. So these organizations have a self-interest in getting involved in speaking with their legislators, or writing op-eds, or mobilizing their constituents to put in calls to the legislative leaders, or going down to Springfield and mobilizing there. One thing that we found particularly interesting and successful is we've been able to build up a pretty decent relationship with, of all people, House Republican staff. Who you wouldn't think of as being all that sympathetic to immigrants, but several Republican members have significant immigrant populations in their districts, and so the way that we've been able to talk with them and communicate our concerns is by organizing citizenship workshops in their districts. So we've done this in DeKalb, in Rockford, in Mount Vernon, in Springfield, all places that are represented by Republicans. And when it came down to the vote to override the governor's veto on the appropriations, many of these legislators ended up casting their votes to override. We'd like to think, in part, out of concern about this rather small slice of the budget, but still, these are legislators who got really sensitized about the impact of the budget impasse, and these are relationships that we hope to continue to rely on in the future. At least within the caucus. Many of these guys are retiring, unfortunately, but at least we've developed a relationship within the caucus.
And I just want to make sure everyone knows that is a specific campaign that was targeted on a specific budget line item, yes. The immigrant services line item that was zeroed out. So do you have any tips for mobilizing the base? Mobilizing your bases around campaigns?
Okay. Well, first off, I think volume counts. It is important to inform and mobilize as many people as possible, whether it's students or clients or staff members, family members, your relatives, your neighbors. Volume does count with respect to the numbers of calls or emails generated to the different offices. Actually, one piece of advice that I've heard fairly consistently is telling personal stories. Whether it's the person empowered to tell his or her own story and share his or her own experience with the program or with a particular benefit, and ideally, sharing that information through either a handwritten letter or even more effectively an in-person meeting. So volume counts, but also quality counts, and I would try to throw both of those elements into the mix.
I would say don't sleep on this upswing in activism. There's been, the amount of activism that has come out of the 2016 election gives us an opportunity, I think, to really kind of capitalize on that activism. So now is a good time to mobilize your base because people want to know what to do and how they can help and what they should be doing and how to call. You need to give them the tools and that to do it, right? People are often very scared, like they're going to get policy questions if they call their legislator, if they meet with them in person. So giving people tools is essential. Helping them, maybe even doing it all together in some way so that they can see that really you're just going to like leave your name, number, and where you live. Most of the time in your position on an issue, you're not going to get a whole lot of pushback on a phone call. And in person, I think the personal stories are incredibly effective. Again, that's terribly scary to people. So prepping people who are willing to do it in how to respond if they do get pushback, staying on message, those are all, they're simple things to do. If somebody pushes back like, well, what about the pension? You're not there to talk about the pension. Talk about what you're there to talk about. Politicians are phenomenal at it. We need to get better at it. And so don't let people push you into like, oh God, I don't know the number. I don't know that tell your story and tell it well. So I think and once people are less scared to do those things, they're able to share how easy it is with other people. They're able to push that out and organize more people as well.
Oh, go ahead, Jazmine. I'll go.
Just want to add another tool, and at least for me that's been helpful, was making it as easy for people to participate as possible. So all this week we've had advocacy events, the rally on Tuesday. Yesterday we had a social media day of action. Today we're encouraging providers to write letters to their aldermen and encouraging their students to do so. So we sent out a template that's like line by line, asking people questions to get them to kind of think about, okay, how do we begin to share our story with our aldermen? So basically, it's almost like putting the pen in their hand and saying, all you have to do is just put your voice in there.
And Brenda, do you want to?
Yeah, just one quick thing, because we're a direct service organization, I thought it might just be helpful to share like a transition that we have kind of made as an organization. We have been very good over the years of talking about the great impact of the work that we do, right? Like we do this work and here's how the students are advancing in reading level growth and, all of that. The shift that we have made, and quite frankly, it's because we were told no a couple of times on some things that we were working on that we think are very, very important to the fabric of the city. And as a team, we let those no's like fuel us, right? Like, wait a second, maybe people don't understand how critical this work is. So now as an organization, we start to speak from not like bleakness, but we speak from need. The Chicago Public School District does not have budget for libraries. Our schools do not have librarians unless they're raising private dollars. We are infusing a library culture into the classrooms, into schools, where this doesn't exist. The disinvestment that the state is making in our, economically disadvantaged kids. So what's happening is our board is starting to talk about the organization in a different way, right? So when you talk about how you mobilize the base, at our annual meeting, it was a message that is different than I think our key stakeholders are used to hearing, and I do kind of feel like a lobbyist, right? Like when we made this transition just a number of months ago, it was like, my good friends who are here today know this to be true. There can be a conversation happening about the environment, and I will be like, what is impacting the environment? Gaps in third grade reading proficiency. It is. And then pivot. And like a little more vodka, and I'll really pivot. So I think it's like leveraging what is relevant, right? Like recently, the CEO Business Roundtable, that advises on policy nationwide. The policy change that they're looking for is a focus on, how gaps in literacy skills, for our younger students is impacting the workforce and is becoming expensive, and that there will be 5 million people in the workforce by 2020 that do not have the basic literacy skills to do their jobs. And so the message now to our volunteers when I'm out kind of like on the campaign is you are standing in the gap and you are changing, you are literally disrupting that trajectory that 80% of our students are going to be on if they're not hitting these benchmarks, right? So you are disruptors. So instead of like, oh, you're going to enjoy all those benefits of volunteering and the student's going to be impacted and grow and whatever, all of those things are important, and we want our volunteers to be fulfilled, but we want them to feel like, they are part of a core of people that are going in, and they are, impacting this change that is essential, not just to the economic, viability of our city, but of our nation, right? So I think it's and it's not empty messaging, but it's as an organization, we have turned to advocacy, and not been apologetic about it, right? Where before it's oh, we can't do this and we can't do this because we want to be careful about what we say and who we might upset. But the data is the data. So anyway, just thought I'd share that.
Okay, Alex, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your work, and you're right in time for a question for you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Tyndall-Wiesendanger. I'm the field director of the Responsible Budget Coalition. The first thing I should tell you about myself is I'm incredibly sorry. This was one of those days where I desperately needed the CTA to be on it, and it was not. So I'm sorry, and especially being up here with a really distinguished set of folks, I feel what a jerk. Of course, the white man would be the guy who walks in late. He's important. So I apologize, but thank you so much for having me. My work?
Yes.
So the Responsible Budget Coalition we're the tax people. We are the people who come together to say all of the work that we all do, that you all do, is important, and it's valuable, and our state needs to invest in it. The state budget is a core resource for literacy and for overall welfare. It funds our schools, not nearly as much as it should, our human service programs, not nearly as much as it should, our higher education, not nearly as much as it should. And instead of continuing to argue that we should cut and cut and cut, right, and get more efficient, but no one actually knows what they're actually wanting to cut, when you poll folks, 80% of Illinoisans say there should be cuts in the state budget, and then when you ask them what to cut, you go through all the things the budget pays for, and 70% say no, don't cut that at all. We should invest more in it. So we're a big tent coalition, from labor to human service groups to education groups to faith groups to community organizing groups, that advocate for our state budget to choose revenue, not cuts, and to have justice in the way that we raise that revenue. So I'll stop there, and it sounds like there's a question.
Yeah, so my question specifically for you, but I'm sure that others can weigh in. How important is it to appeal to the diverse groups, particularly in Illinois, where there's a large urban population, rural and suburban?
So it's incredibly important, is the short answer. Living in Chicago, right, it's very easy for us to think about, Chicago is the economic engine of our state, but it also is not the majority. Almost, but not quite. And I spent the last 2 days in the Metro East area and Carbondale. And what you'll find is that the issues that folks are facing are exactly the same as ours. They're exactly the same. But we don't do a good job of building those kind of cross bridges, right? There's this idea that when you look at the state budget, that money gets sucked up and pours into Chicago. That's not true. And it's easy for us to kind of say, oh, those dumb downstate folks, they just don't get it. But I actually blame us, right? We have not done the work to go and say, your schools aren't enough. You don't have this, the programs you need for your youth, and neither do we. And how do we do that together? And when we don't do that, we lose. And I'd say similarly, when we, very narrowly define our issues, we lose. When we allow ourselves to say oh yeah, cut something else because early childhood or literacy needs to get funded, we lose. And because the next year they cut us instead. But when we acknowledge and recognize that we really are tied together, not to sound too hippy-dippy here, but it's true, right? We really are tied together, and we really are facing the same issues, then we can get there, right? Rural schools are in trouble. In fact, as badly funded as Chicago public schools are, we are not the ones with the biggest funding crisis. That belongs to East St. Louis, right? That belongs to rural schools in Southern Illinois that have, you think Chicago property taxes are bad? They're not as bad as they are down there, right? Because there's no other money. to fund our schools. So there's a lot of commonality. And the last thing I would say, just to add to what everyone was saying before, is when we think about messaging, we want a message about need, but I think more importantly, we want a message about vision and all of us. When you talk about those needy people or even our needy people, most people don't think about themselves. And then we get into this, well, they should work harder and they have bad parents kind of paradigms that people think. But when we talk about what is the community we all want to live in, we all want to live in a community where everyone has the opportunity to succeed and thrive. And that means a community that has reading programs, that has libraries, that has well-functioning schools. We all want that, and we should invest in it. That's a conversation almost everyone can get behind.
Thank you. What are some aspects, as we're thinking about campaign work, of the research stage of the campaign that you consider vital?
Am I talking?
Go ahead,
So I will say one thing about this. One is to think strategically. So the research can really help you identify where to go to start the conversation, because it's not always mobilize everybody, have a big rally. Sometimes you can get things done in different ways. So it's really important to understand, what is the need, who is the right lever to pull to get something done. And I'll just a quick, about the paid sick time in the city of Chicago. For years, we were running our paid sick days campaign at the state level and had not even considered Chicago. And other cities and municipalities had passed this in other states. I think 20 plus cities and municipalities have passed this across the country. And, we thought we were going to be able to get it done down in Springfield. And I think a research opportunity opened up. What about the city? The city could be a way to make the lever work a little bit better at the state level. And so we did some research, and that included things like putting it on the ballot. So we had a good number of 82% of voters in the city of Chicago support paid sick days. That is an incredible piece of information that we would not have had otherwise. So we were able to walk into every room to say, this is what your constituency says they want. Why don't we have this? So I think those kinds of pieces, understanding what numbers actually mean something to the people who you're speaking to is really important. I will also say, our work in the state, understanding the legislators and what moves them is also critically important. So some legislators care about the state as a whole. Some legislators care about their district. And if you have numbers on the state as a whole, they're like, okay, but how does this impact my district? If you have numbers on their district, they're like, okay, well, I'm running for state office next year. I haven't told anybody, but I'm doing it. And I want to know, is this just going to look good in my neighborhood, or is this going to look good overall? So having those kinds of pieces when you walk in the room can really change the conversation you get to have.
I was going to supplement what Sarah said by pulling out the term power analysis. Oh, well, okay. Beat you to it, sorry. Well, you can supplement what I'm going to say too then. It is, as Sarah suggested, a matter of figuring out, first off, who has the power to make the change that you want? Which level of government, which elected officials? Is this a matter of passing a statute or an ordinance? Is it a matter, is it an executive, agency decision that could be made? Who's the appropriate target here? And then once you identify the target, how do you get to that target? What kind of levers do you have? What are the concerns of this particular person? What relationships does this person have? Who does this person listen to? Is there a potential media strategy? Does this person read the Chicago Tribune or the Chicago Sun-Times or the State Journal Register? Are there people within our networks who can get to this person? Or if not directly, are there kind of bank shots or second-degree relationships that we we can try to leverage. Does this person listen to organized labor? Does organized labor fund this person? Do business interests fund this person? Who makes campaign contributions to them? Are there particular interests that this person has that might overlap, whether it's children or healthcare or education? In kind of my line of work, there are relatively few legislators that will outright say, yeah, I'm concerned about immigrants. But many of them have significant immigrant populations in their districts. Many of them have agencies that work with immigrants in their districts that that have been able to build up good relationships. So it's a matter of doing that kind of mapping, and then once you've done that mapping, putting the plan together to, activate those networks to get to these people. So, Alex, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's interesting that you heard, right, is when we think about research, you think about like going online or going to books and finding data, and no one here is telling you that's not important, but really, really good facts and 250 will get you on the train. So you have to do exactly what we're talking about and understanding what's actually going to move it. And if you want to write this down to make this simple, here's the questions. What do we want very specifically? Who can give it to us? And put give in quotes because no one gives you anything. What does that person want? What do they need? Who are they in relationship with? And then what do we have / what can we do to impact the answers to those last questions? If you don't answer those 6 questions at the beginning of your campaign, maybe by dumb luck you'll win, but it's unlikely.
That's actually a very good development and fundraising strategy as well. So as my development team just walked in, I see you. That's that's how you raise money.
Okay, how do your individual organizations determine your policy priorities?
Well, I think for us, last month we had a retreat here at the Literature Center for our Advocacy Advance, because we're advancing the field forward. And so we basically gathered providers, admin staff together, and we kind of talked about what's going on in your classroom, what have you seen in the field, what have you seen in policy, and then from there we identified short-term, medium-term, and long-term policy goals and benchmarks. So from there we are going to move forward with our policy campaign, but I think it comes from the people who are on the front lines, who do engage with adult education policy every day when they teach a class, or they write case notes, or they write notes. So definitely inserting and centering the perspectives and opinions of providers and students themselves as well.
Does anyone else want to add into that one?
Well, we're a big coalition, so quick show of hands, how many of your organizations are members of the Responsible Budget Coalition? So if you want to tell us what to do, you should join the Responsible Budget Coalition. Go to responsiblebudget.org and sign up, and our membership determines kind of what we're going to do. Obviously, we're all about raising revenue for the state budget. Shameless plug.
ICIRR is also a coalition of different organizations. I'm not going to, do the same kind of survey that Alex did, but yeah, we fairly actively and frequently engage our member organizations. We consult with them regarding what's important, and we go through, a process of discussions with our membership. We also kind of part of my job is identifying potential issue priorities, and believe me, there are a lot of priorities out there. Are a lot of things we could be doing. It's in large part a matter of figuring out what constituencies can get behind a particular issue, or have a self-interest in working on a particular issue. Again, whether it's state funding or Trust Act, or I was just on a call regarding legislation to ban registry programs based on religion or national origin, which of course is very important to our Muslim brothers and sisters. Are there groups within our membership, or that can get behind and mobilize behind a particular issue and bring it to the rest of our membership, and then get ratification from our broader membership. Again, this. There's research involved, all the different, power analysis research out there, but also just, what is actually going on, what's the, and what can we do about it, and that tends to be my job at ICRR.
Okay. Oh, Sarah.
Oh, no, I think that's sufficient.
Okay. When it comes to grassroots work, so moving from policy to kind of this grassroots lens, what do you think are effective uses of technology? In particular, how important is social media?
So I'll go first. So I love combining communications and social justice. I think if you know how to do social media really well and effectively, it can amplify what's going on the ground. So for example, on Tuesday when we had our rally for adult education, there were people who were live tweeting, who were taking pictures, and that really broadcast this message all over Chicago and even all over the world. So I think social media, I know RBC, they had their 1 in a Million Illinois campaign, which we participated in. So what we did was we reached out to one of our providers on the west side at United for Better Living, who had been severely impacted by the budget impasse. And adult educations on the west and the south sides were impacted heavily by the budget impasse. So we wanted to really lift up that voice and amplify that message and say, it's one thing for me in the loop as admin to talk about it, but it's one thing if it's a provider themselves talking about it.
I'll add one thing. I think social media is really important. It's also important to understand what it can do and what it can't do. So amplification is a really good word. What social media will do is it can help you mobilize the folks who are already with you. And that's good. However, to get where most of us need to go, we need to get beyond the people who already know they agree with us, and that requires a different set of tools. I'm sorry to say you got to get off your phone or your computer, and that's where you actually have to go knock doors and sit down with people and talk about values and our vision for our communities and then connect it to the work. Once those folks are activated, social media again creates great ways to get your message out to them and get them moving. But we shouldn't confuse those two things, and I think that we often have in our social movements recently. And that's why you see like the same 200 people at actions for all different things, because they're all on the same Facebook lists, and that's great, again. But if you want to get beyond that, and especially as you're thinking about how decision makers are impacted, they get that and they'll see it. So thinking about, a Facebook like is not nearly as powerful as, I heard you talking as I come in, as a phone call is not nearly as powerful as a human being in person, is not nearly as powerful as 10 people showing up to your office. So understanding those two different things, that to really organize, we need to get beyond the folks who already agree with us, and that's not what we're likely to get using tools like social media, but it can amplify our message, let people know what's happening, and put the people who are with us already into action in a way that old school we had to do phone trees that took a long time.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and our team does a great job with social media, but I agree with like the amplification. What we've been talking about a lot is like, how are we, with our kind of like our shift in the way that we approach the work, and that we're, looking at messaging around our work. It's like, how are we training our key stakeholders to be the advocates that we need them to be? And where do we have access to them? And what do they know about the program that they are in, their part of their slice of WITS? And how do we get them up here so that they understand that when they're talking about the organization, they're not saying, students come into our, Exelon offices and we read with them and it feels really great and I see the impact in the student, but rather they're starting with, and even for some of our board members, not with only the program that they know in their personal experience, but I am part of the, largest volunteer corps of mentors in Chicago Public Schools. These are the, budgetary gaps that we are standing in. This is why we call our programs literacy mentorship. This is what we're providing for our teachers who don't have, libraries in their classrooms. Some of them don't have libraries in their schools, and this is what that means. So they're talking about that kind of like broad, addressing the broad need. We keep like drilling in. It's like talk about the greater good first, and then underscore it with your experience. So I think that applies as well. And then you hook them with the social media, right? And then social media becomes a tool because they're understanding like, oh, this is how I talk about the work of the organization.
I'm actually the wrong person to ask about social media because I'm not on social media. I'm older than I look. But I did want to make a couple of comments regarding messaging more generally. And I think, with any campaign, you do want to, be, I don't want to say cautious, but thoughtful regarding the language you use. If anything, so that you're not foreclosing further possibilities or further advocacy goals that you may have. And then second, and perhaps most important, that you're not unnecessarily excluding anybody, particularly potential allies. In immigration world, there's actually a lot of controversy over the term dreamer. Which many young people who have DACA find exclusionary because it lifts them up at the expense of their parents or their neighbors or their friends who do not qualify for DACA and who are likely to be excluded from a legislative fix. So that's kind of an example of language that you do have to be somewhat careful about, so with some thought and particularly with some consultation of people who are going to be directly affected, your messaging can be much more powerful.
How have collaborations, maybe even with organizations that do the same work, helped you? How do you get those collaborations moving your work along?
We're doing a lot of work in the collaboration space, so I can kind of launch this. So as I mentioned earlier, a few years ago, Boundless Readers became part of the WITS organization and their signature program, the Rochelle Teacher Award Program. Forefront, which used to be Donors Forum, is really focused on missions, this mission sustainability initiative, giving organizations kind of this forum to talk about formal collaborations, mergers, acquisitions, in a way that is focused, again, like on the greater good, right? Like, okay, let's take heart and ego out of it, which is sometimes so hard in the work that we all do, and think like, could we be stronger together? And if we could be stronger together, what does that look like, in a real meaningful way? And so board members having those conversations. So, WITS is kind of like, relatively fresh off this experience, which kind of felt like a marriage, right? When our two boards first met at a social event, I was like, the in-laws are meeting, I'm so nervous. Are they gonna like each other? Like, everybody nice. But it is a sort of marriage, and it needs to make sense. There also needs to be this like level of objectivity, right? Where like, let's look at the mission side by side. Look at the program models side by side. What do we have to work with here? So there's this level of like, diplomacy and culture and trust, which needs to kind of lead the process. It's like in, my staff, please don't walk out when I start to talk about this because I hear it all the time. But it's like in yoga, like if your core is not, totally strong, and if you are not grounded, then you can't, thank you, Alex, then you can't open up, you can't do heart openers, because if you start to do heart openers before your core is solid, you're gonna topple over, right? So the heart, as much as we have heart in the work that we do, like that core, like has to be so strong. So, I think in any collaboration, it has to be like that. If the hearts are just coming together, it's like, oh, I like your work, we like your work. Then you're just being champions for each other, and that's super cool. But collaborations are so hard. This is difficult work. And for executive directors and CEOs, if it can become burnout work, right? If you're not getting the support that you need. So I think that, having that foundation is so critical, and having resources like we have at Forefront right now is absolutely critical. And also giving any collaboration like room to breathe, right? Like let's figure out like, what makes sense. Let's be honest and trusting about what doesn't make sense. We're doing it at the Chicago Literacy Alliance right now in this time of tremendous growth. It's like all these existential questions start to surface, right? Which is a super healthy thing. That like, okay, who are we? What does the future look like? What is our narrative as a collaboration? What is our, and then really encouraging board members and staff members to say, how does what we're doing in this collaboration fit into the narrative of our value systems in our lives? And then I think a collaboration can live and grow and be sustainable. But we live in a city right now that there's a lot of focus on, what is effective collaboration? What does that look like? What is collective impact? And having healthy conversations around that. So I think it's a real opportunity, again, with the Chicago Literacy Alliance and, other coalitions, to take a look at how effective we're being and how we can, truly claim that we are stronger together and not just kind of like holding hands in kumbaya, right? Does that make sense?
I'm,
Is there a question?
There is going to be time for questions at the end. How are we doing on time? Okay. Yeah, so there is going to be time for questions. I only have like 2 more things.
Okay. I'm going to share an example of kind of the flip side of that, which is marriages of convenience, or unlikely alliances. There's a saying in the political world: no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. And sometimes you do end up working with people who you may disagree with 90% of the time, but on this one particular area, they're right with you. And if that opportunity arises, why not avail yourself of that opportunity? The example I'm going to talk about really briefly is a bill that we worked on 8 years ago that would make it easier for African hair braiders to get state licenses. Under previous law, African hair braiders needed to go through the full gamut of cosmetology training, much of which was unnecessary for them because all they were doing was hair. And so these were requirements that were essentially preventing many African immigrants from setting up their own businesses. So of course, we were working with United African Organization and several other members that work with the African diaspora on moving this legislation, but then we got contacted by the Illinois Policy Institute, which you can tell yours too. Yeah, IPI's been in the news a lot recently over the past few months, so their reputation is kind of known. They're super conservative, super libertarian. But on issues of entrepreneurship, and particularly immigrant entrepreneurship, they saw this bill as encouraging free enterprise. So of course, they were going to be supportive of this, and they were super helpful in rounding up Republican support for this bill. And the bill ended up passing fairly overwhelmingly and getting signed into law. So, Alex,
No, I agree with Sarah. We only need one good thing. I'll say that we ended up working a bill with them, but never talking to them because my organization had marched on their office like a month before. But no, it was great. We were able to say but on this bill, and they lobbied Republicans, and we had a little go-between. But that's unlikely allies. On 99% of stuff,
hey,
we're so against them that we literally marched on their offices and chanted IPI stop the lies. But then on because 99% of what they say is lies. But on this one thing, we agree. People should be able to get jobs, right? And the state shouldn't say who locals should be able to hire. So you can do that. And I just underscore what was said too, is that coalitions and collaboration take time and energy. And you can't short that. And my saying is have the hard conversations on the front end, because what you don't want to do is get into work or get into a campaign and then it's go time and all of a sudden you're there's this big disagreement that we didn't surface and talk about.
What I want to say is we can't not work in coalition. I mean, we're an advocacy organization with 22 employees. We don't do direct service. Our stories come from partners. Our stories come from working with community organizers and organizations that organize community members. So, like, without that, we don't have any stories. But the other thing I want to say is don't just go back to the same people all the time. Right, there are new people, not just unlikely, but people who new organizations that are up and coming, organizations that you don't reach out to all the time. Think about diversity in your coalitions that maybe didn't exist when you started working together with the same 5 organizations, and that's the groups you've been working with. Because there are new organizations all the time, there are organizations that are meeting needs, and I think we can all do better if we think outside the like, oh, we know these people will support this piece of work for us. So really think about broadening coalitions and collaborations that you have already.
Can I just add to that? Because we're in the same boat at CCLC. We don't do direct service work, but being in this space has been really helpful because there are adult education providers in this space. So in March, we took a busload of students down to Springfield, and I was able to go over to Literacy Chicago and talk to the students directly and say, hey, do you want to get on a bus? Some of them did. We were all very happy. So yeah, definitely just kind of like reaching out, knowing what you have and what you don't have, and viewing collaboration as a way to also expand capacity. I like to think in organizing, it's all about power. We can educate our elected officials, but when we organize and when we come together, we have power. That's why IASA and, they have these big lobby days, because it's one thing if it's CCLC one day, Literacy Works the next day, but if we all come together, we all go at the same time, then we can have a big impact.
Can I throw one more thing out there? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I think the other thing is you have to get cross-sector. So if you look at whether it's our work on the budget or work on anything big, the goal of the other side, and right now, there's been a very specific goal, right? Can you divide public sector unions from service providers? That was the entire political goal of the budget impasse. And if we do that, we all lose. So we've got to go beyond the things we all care about the same exact issue to identify what are the larger places that we need to come together and stand, whether it's, kind of like black-brown unity with white allies, whether it's unions and community, which is maybe the hardest of kind of community labor coalitions. But if we don't do that kind of work, in the end, we don't have the power to win. So making sure that we understand that our struggles are really vital, but that we don't try to win them at the cost of someone else who we share values with, right? Like, don't rob Peter to pay Paul. Don't knock another bill. Don't, demonize another set of folks to help yours be the good, needy people, right? We need to do that work very broadly. And if we don't, you can win small things for short times, but we lose the big stuff, and we have budget impasses and terrifying elected officials.
As we think about the campaigns that you all have worked on in the past, what would you say are your most valuable lessons learned? You had to learn something.
I guess I'm new to this space, so I'm learning in real time right now. I've mentioned a couple of times to really focus on third grade reading proficiency. So we're talking to a number of organizations, some who are represented in this room, about what a pilot would look like, going into schools and neighborhoods that have a high percentage of opportunity youth. So opportunity youth are 16 through 24-year-olds who are not in school and are not in the workforce. And, we have all the data that tells us that when students aren't making that transition from learning to read to reading to learn, they're 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. So, we're thinking of taking kind of a longitudinal approach, or a long-term rather approach to addressing this, and, kind of a focused collaborative approach in some of the neighborhoods that are most challenged with high rates of opportunity youth. So what I'm learning in real time is because I've always worked for organizations that are raising money for public governmental agencies or arts and cultural programming or direct service. And so this is like, so I'm starting to learn from, people like my good friend who's running the Red Cross. I'm like, I'm not running an advocacy organization, but I feel like I'm turning into a lobbyist. Am I doing things right? Am I doing things wrong? And she's like, you are an advocate for, the students that you're serving. And so this is how you frame that, So I feel again like, a lot of it, because these are all direct service providers coming together to not just think about how we would do this in certain schools, but we have to build an influence base in a city where there's not a lot of attention in this space and how critical that benchmark is. Where a lot of other cities have, taken this kind of approach and, there's been real impact. So it's, what I'm learning is like, when to kind of push and when to back off because I'm starting to like really upset people, right? And I'm not very good at finding that balance, but I'm starting to kind of like feel those conversations so that I am taking the foot off the accelerator at the right times. I could learn a lot from you all, I think, probably.
So I think this will be common knowledge to maybe many people in this room, but one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given is not to make somebody's decision for them. And this comes in the space of organizing. So I know you may be teaching people who have a lot on their plate and they have kids and they're going to school and they're working a job and whatever. And so you're like, I don't want to ask if they want to go to Springfield. Don't do it. That's not your decision to make. And that goes for legislators, that goes for policymakers too, right? Do not say, I've already decided that this person is not going to be on my side, because there are unlikely allies. There are a number of legislators who are mostly now retiring did on the Republican side vote to veto governor or override the veto, and they were unlikely allies, but if you had made that decision to not ask them, they weren't going to do it, right? If they don't have any public pressure on them and if they don't have any individual pressure on them, they're not doing it. So don't make somebody's decision for them. Always, always ask.
I guess I'd add a couple things. The first is don't be afraid of, and in fact, you need to engage folks at the grassroots. The second is don't be afraid of tension. And going along with that is really, especially with engaging elected officials, as a group, they're for the status quo. The status quo has gotten them into office, and there is a trap of reasonability. Don't fall into it, right? They're going to try to convince you this is, we got to understand the bigger picture, and don't fall for it, right? Be the experts on our own experience, as our brothers and sisters in the Black Youth Project say. We're the experts on our own experience. And be willing to change the political calculation. That's what folks in the community can do. Be unreasonable. The Tea Party does this really well, and look how they've moved our country. We're like, oh, we shouldn't upset people, we need to sound reasonable, and things that we really care about lose. So be willing to say, right, especially your grassroots folks, maybe your paid lobbyist can't, but this is why you need your program participants to say, don't you dare come home without. This is what we need. And even though electeds all will tell you they don't like that, they'll also then go respond to it, right? They all say, I don't respond to that kind of pressure, or I don't like being given, yes/no questions. But being willing to do that will really, really help you. And they come back and end up turning around. So I think that that's valuable.
I'm going to add two things that are going to sound contradictory. One is be persistent. Keep your eyes on the prize. Our effort to pass the Trust Act took 3 years. We actually thought it would take longer. Our effort to pass driver's licenses was a 14-year effort. We finally got it done a few years ago, which actually leads me to the other point, which is be flexible, adapt. be aware of the changes in the political landscape. Be aware of opportunities that may arise. Keep learning. Maintain conversations, maintain relationships, because you never know what's going to come up. We won driver's licenses largely because we were able to take advantage of the results of the 2012 elections, and Republicans in the General Assembly realizing, at least here in Illinois, they have to adapt, or they will, they will end up a permanent minority. They may end up a permanent minority anyway, but their prospects for further growth are going to be limited if they shut this legislation down. And again, don't be afraid to build new relationships or seek out unusual suspects when it comes to potential alliances.
I want to say one other thing, which is also reinforce good behavior. I know a lot of us are here in Chicago, or many. I know I'm in Chicago, and so often we just know that our legislators are going to vote the way we want them to vote, and we may not go talk to them. We may not encourage them to do it. But if we're not top of mind, and you want them to be champions, not just supportive. And so when they do something that you appreciate, or if you want them to do something, even if you know that they are going to do it, it's worth saying thank you. It's worth reaching out to say, please do. And just make sure that they know you're listening at all times. You're listening when they're doing good things, and if they're going to do something that you don't like.
We see you when you're sleeping.
Yeah. Maybe not the best choice, but sure.
I think I'll say something a little more practical, maybe. My grandma was a social worker in the 50s and 60s, and I never really thought this piece of advice would come into play so much. But she said, always wear sensible shoes, because you'll never know when you'll need to be marching. So with that note, let's maybe go into a question phase from you all. I think there was one over here for sure.
So those of you that are involved, there's been a lot of talk about the political landscape and politics and how to deal with legislatures. So my question is, have any of you considered taking the leap to become a legislator instead of being on that side of it? And so I see you shaking your head vehemently that the answer is no, but I'm curious to know why or why not. And if you're encouraging people that you're seeing advocating through your efforts to do that, what does that look like? If we're trying to change the landscape, wouldn't it make sense to change the people that are making those decisions on our behalf?
I have, but I was a bartender for 16 years, so there's a few skeletons. I don't know.
This is Chicago, right? That helps.
Yeah, right. Right.
I've been told that.
I mean, I think we have an opportunity. I mean, we do have somewhat of an opportunity. I am. Maybe I've considered it, but not realistically. But I think we have opportunities to do that, right? A lot of legislators are retiring, like a new one every day. So there is an opportunity to elect people who are more in line with your values. And in the city, the opportunity is to, really drill down there into values and outside the city, it's maybe more of a large, a larger conversation or whatever. But here, vote in your primary, because that matters, right? People's minute differences in a primary could really change the landscape in the city of Chicago and for the state overall. But yeah, no, I've worked too. I mean, Illinois is an interesting state.
Well, I think you're right. We need to run for office. People need to run for office. You're going to talk about candidate schools in a minute, right? Good. Okay, so he's going to talk about that. For me, very simply, I live in a community that's 97% black, and I feel like the last thing we need is another articulate white guy speaking for our neighborhood, so I'm safe. But my wife was really considering running against our alderman, who's awful, and may still. And I think that that's really important. So. Democracy works best when people are kept honest. I think that for organizers, what you have to be careful of is it can really color the way you're seen in a neighborhood, right? So if you're the organizer and then you start running, it's sort of like, did you organize just to eventually get yourself into office? So being clear about your intention, but I think organizations, and more of us are starting to do this, and this is my layup pass here, is to start, like, the leaders that we're developing absolutely need to start getting trained to run, because our allies and even our so-called champions are never challenged to do even better, and it works best when we do that, so we absolutely need to train folks. And to talk about that,
yes. Thank you, Alex. Let me do the layup here, or do the dunk. So yeah, ICIRR believes in the exact premise of your question as you laid out, that we cannot rely on people to champion us or our interests. We have to do it ourselves. And so several times, I believe we've got one coming up this fall, actually, we are going to be running candidate schools. We have run candidate schools where we train people as to the nuts and bolts of, running a political campaign, and being, appearing in media and doing the door knocking and building up the relationships that one may need to to actually run for office. I would never do so myself. I don't have the personality. I know that, but other people do. I actually count a couple of fairly close friends as people who are now in office. One of whom is a Chicago alderman, who has been in the news recently because he just got dumped from a gubernatorial ticket. But there's another person who founded an organization in Seattle very similar to ours, who rose up through the ranks. She's now a member of Congress, and she's getting a lot of attention as a leader of the resistance. These are the stories that we'd like to be able to tell more of, and as the opportunities arise, with the retirements and with a lot of other things going on, people are becoming interested and engaged, and willing to take the chance to run for office. So yeah, we want to encourage that.
Hi, so in going back to the theme about advocacy as marketing, can you talk a little bit about how your organization has thought about language, especially language around your constituents, and being really sensitive to not continuing the story of these people are victims, but being really respectful of their experience?
Yeah, I already presented the example of the use of the term dreamer. I'll actually, let me use another example. Much of the rhetoric regarding immigration has been around economic contributions. So these, immigrants are, there we go. Thank you, Lin-Manuel Miranda. Immigrants, we get the job done. Though I think that can be applied in different contexts. But there is a certain sector of opinion making that does look at the economy and the role that immigrants play in the economy. But I think there's growing concern about how that kind of rhetoric can exclude people with disabilities, or people who people have lower levels of education, and so may not have as much earning power and as much spending power, or people who live in areas with chronic unemployment. and just kind of more general concern about, about whether immigrants should be defined by their economic value as opposed to their deeper dignity. So this is an ongoing challenge. I'm not saying that we have the answer to that, far from it, but it is, as this concern has emerged, we're being more careful about the language that we use.
Alex, it's a good thing I'm talking after you because you mentioned the word restorative justice. A lot of people don't understand that term, so when I'm done, I'm going to ask you to explain a little bit more. Okay? But one thing I noticed is that when we talk about kids, 16 to 24-year-olds that drop out of school and that are not working, we don't talk about what happens, and many of them end up in our jails and are incarcerated. And a lot of the kids that I work with in the IYCs in the area, Literacy Volunteers of Illinois, the nonprofit I work for, we go in there. Most of the kids probably that are 15, 16, and 17 have 5th and 6th grade reading levels. The first young man I worked with tested at 2nd grade. And when I worked with him, he was so excited. He wanted to learn to read. And and when we have so many people in jail, we have to think about what it costs. It's very expensive. I don't know how much a year, somebody may know here, how much a year it costs to house a young person or even an adult in jail. So it is, I think we need to, especially in a city like Chicago, we need to talk more about, keeping kids out of jail and being incarcerated, because once they're there, they often come back, and many of them end up in adult prisons. And back to you, Alex, with restorative justice, that's a flip of the punitive approach, and a more, in my mind, a healthier approach to get people in prisons to become productive citizens, and even before they go to prison, help them work through the issues. But I think you could probably explain it better than me.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this really quickly, because for folks at a very basic, our current paradigm is a punitive paradigm. It asks 3 questions: what rule was broken, who broke it, and how do we punish them for it? A restorative paradigm asks what harm was done, how can the harm be healed, and how can everyone be restored to community? And there's any number of practices that fit into that. Peace hubs, talking circles, mediation. They're run by communities instead of a sort of professionalized folks whose job it is to figure out how long you get locked up for, right? And it helps communities heal. We can talk a lot about that at a different time. I also think, though, you're 100% right. The amount of money we spend, average in IDOC is about $25,000 to $30,000 per person, $70,000 per youth per year that we incarcerate. The Chicago Public Schools, these numbers I'm going to give you are about 8 years old, because that's when I worked on this issue. We were spending $70 million a year in CPS to have police officers in our schools. $70 million. We did research that said we could have done the Cadillac of school-based restorative justice in every school for $40 million. Right? But that's what we're doing, and we're making these political choices that cost money and damage us. Right? And so you couldn't be more right. We are wasting money and destroying communities and lives by focusing on a locking up that takes our people and our resources from where they need to be, which is building the communities we all care about. And getting police out of schools and getting everyone who can be, not in prisons and into settings that are about building our communities back up would save us money and make us a better place.
So a number of years ago, Jadine Choi, who many of you may know, took over head of security at Chicago Public Schools. one of the first, like, non-former police officers to take this role. She walked in, and she's come here and done training. She loves to come here, and she loves all the partners that are part of the Alliance that are doing work in the schools. So she basically walked into her first meeting after, being appointed to the position, and there were, some of her senior staff people who were high-fiving because they had this really high number of arrests and expulsions that week. And she's like, why are we high-fiving this? What is this? And, they basically said, well, like, now some of these, like, bad kids, are out of the district. And she's like, no. This is not how we're doing things. So, immediately, like, implemented restorative justice. And we saw the difference in our schools almost immediately from this screaming, culture, this punitive sort of culture, like the schools that are doing it really, really well. The whole school has changed, right? And she has so there's some work being done in the schools. It's hard, district wide to kind of like purge that punitive culture, like completely. But this is this is exactly what she's talking about. She's like, it's going to cost us less money. It's going to keep these students, in the schools, and it just takes less time. Like what she's showing her teachers and administrators who are kind of like resistant to this approach. She will literally go into the school and see how little time that took me and how everything's okay now. Like, check that out. So it is the right thing.
Cool. And before I take one last question, I just want to highlight our CLA member, Umoja Student Development Corporation, who specializes in restorative justice. So they are here. They host trainings here all the time. They're a program partner, so you can participate if you're a CLA member. So definitely look them up. They're awesome. All right, one last question. Anyone? All right, running back.
I hope this is okay. We've been talking a lot about policy on the legislation, the government side. I am trying to work a lot to get corporate sponsorship of my work. I feel that, and this statistic is probably really old, but something that I found that's stable is from 2002 or 2003, that 43% of our adults in America are reading at a third grade reading level or below. So my conversation with a lot of people that are in the corporate workforce is to say, I don't care whichever corporation you're with, whether it's an Apple or a Google, or you're with State Farm Insurance or BP Amoco or any of our corporates, at most they're looking at 57% of our population to hire from. This is the reality. And so what are we collectively doing for that 43% that essentially we're leaving behind? And so I'm trying to change it in the corporate landscape where it's great to look, to the government for help, but I feel that whether it's any of the organizations in here, and I openly say this, I don't care if you support my organization or you pick any of the other ones that are out there that are doing literacy work, how can we get corporations as a body, how can we start working on this and gaining attention through the media to what we're doing? And I would love to see, if you have any suggestions on that or how we can come together more in that regard.
We could just hang out and talk about this all day. But, so I think everyone in this room and the CLA at large should be like the CEO Business Roundtable report. Like there's all the academic research that has been done on like how low literacy scores impact high school graduation, college persistence, how students start to fall through the cracks in the district if they're not, third, fourth, fifth grade, proficiency at that point. And we heard even from Commissioner Bannon earlier that there is time after the third grade, right? It's not like, oh, well, now it's over after the third grade. But the CEO Business Roundtable report, it is called Why Reading Matters and What to Do About It. These are the top CEOs in the country saying, if we don't do something about it, our economic engine will continue to kind of like fall apart. We should all be talking about this in every conversation all of the time, because this is not academic research. These are, so we're talking to our corporate partners. We have 57 of them. About this. They are well versed in it. Some of them are actually, thinking about how this shapes their giving guidelines. But it's not just about third grade reading proficiency. It is about literacy, and we should all be talking about it all of the time, because STEM gets all the, attention, and, all of these technology especially gets like a ton of attention. And I'm going to say it 10 gajillion times. Every single person in this room should go read this report and talk about it all of the time, because literally, the call to action that the CEOs outline supports the work of every organization in this room. So yeah, with you, 100%. First of all, everybody has to read it, right? Like, everybody has to read it, and then I think organizations like the Chicago Literacy Alliance and organizations like Thrive and the Bully Pulpit. Our mayor needs to be talking about it. Every time I see him, our elected officials need to know that, and I've been sending it to commissioners. Everyone, send this out. It supports the work that we're doing, and it supports investment in the work. The report's called Why Reading Matters and What to Do About It by the CEO Business Roundtable.
Can the CLA send that out to everybody? That's a great idea. We'll do that.
Just to add on to that, by 2020, 2/3 of the jobs here in the state will require a college education. And 2/3 of workers working people in Illinois don't have a college degree. So I think it's about making them see that it's in their best interest. So encouraging and creating guides, like Brenda just mentioned, I think that's incredibly helpful. And I know, for example, NPR recently, the national NPR, they did a study about a nonprofit in West Virginia that was helping coal miners, go back to school and become educated in other ways because the coal industry has been on the decline. So I think just bringing up those examples too and saying this benefits you. Businesses are complaining that they don't have trained workers, they don't have skilled workers. This is something that can get you those workers that you need.
Can I just add one thing? And I'm really sorry, but it just also makes sure this is a both and, right? What we don't want to get into is, we don't need to put public support behind these because we'll access corporations and private, right? And I know everyone here knows that, but we need to be really careful about not saying, whatever Facebook funds is what matters, right? As much as those kind of dollars are really valuable, also ask them to advocate for our public systems, because in the end, corporate dollars are unaccountable, and our public dollars are at least on some level. So make sure it's a both and. That's the only thing I want to add on that.
I think we're finished. We could probably dialogue all day knowing this group of people, but we'll have time for networking and lunch and things like that, and I'm sure that these individuals all brought their business cards. So, on to the next item.
Thanks.
From the
Thanks,
CLA.
Dena. Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was awesome. Woo! All right. So next up, I want to bring up someone who has had a slightly different perspective of a recent advocacy campaign for some updates. Please welcome Beth Paoli with the Illinois State Library.
Thank you all. I am Beth Paoli. I'm with the Secretary of State Literacy Office. I work for Jesse White. And in his role as Secretary of State, he's also the state librarian, and he has a literacy office. And our purpose is to provide grants to literacy organizations around the state for the purpose of providing adult basic education and English as a second language instruction at the grassroots level. So we fund entities like community-based organizations, community colleges, school districts, to provide services to individuals who are 17 years of age or older. So we're very focused on adult literacy. And we focus on reading, writing, math, and speaking skills. So, yay. He is a big proponent of education, as many of you know. He was an educator himself, and he places a high value on education at all levels. But it has been really important, and you all have done a great job, and the literacy programs around the state have done a great job of staying connected to Secretary White and giving him those real life experiences of how those grant dollars are making an impact and changing lives. We fund adult literacy programming, and we match adults with volunteer tutors to provide that basic skills training. We have family literacy programs where they are working with the parents of young children, preschool children, and school-age children to give them the skills that they need to be successful in school. And then we have an on-site workplace skills enhancement grant program that he funds, where teachers go on site to businesses and are teaching those basic skills that they need. The stories of those individuals are what really drives his ongoing support of this. And the literacy programs around the state did a phenomenal job during this budget impasse to drive that home. They also did a great job of reaching out to their local legislators, and the secretary gets his money from the legislature. So when people would call my office and say, when are we going to announce those grants? It was as a result of a lot of people coming together to make that happen. I would say, I don't really have any control over that. Literacy students and literacy programs are the driving force behind it. I'm lucky enough to get to administer the grant dollars and make sure that they get used in a way that, the way that they were intended for those adult learners at that lowest level. And I think that there are so many wonderful advocates around this room, and I feel like the luckiest person in the world that I get to work with people who are so committed to helping other individuals. And I think that that's what you can take away from this great panel today, that everyone needs to work together. They need to alert the people who are making the decisions about how our state funds are spent. They need to understand the impact that that has on it. I spoke to a group of adult learners who came down to the Capitol in the spring, and I was telling them that, legislators, they have no idea. They don't know that there are adults who don't know how to read or who don't know how to function at a third grade level in math. They're kind of out of touch with a lot of their constituents. So it's our job to let them know how their voting, how their decisions affect each of us and the people that we work with. I will tell you just quickly that we've been funding programs since 1985, literacy programs since 1985. In the 90s, through advocacy, we got up to a level, we started out with $2.5 million. The Secretary Edgar at that time got $2.5 million from the legislature to fund literacy programs. Through advocacy, that amount grew steadily into the 90s, and at one time we were at $8 million that we were able to fund adult volunteer, family literacy, and workplace skills enhancement. Then we had the late 90s when the economy kind of tanked for us, and we've seen a decline in that. So we are, when the budget impasse hit, we were at $5.7 million. We were able to fund about 150 literacy programs around the state. When the budget impasse hit, the Secretary White was still advocating for that $5.7 million that we'd been enjoying in recent years. The legislature gave us $2.05 million. So we were grateful for a little bit of money, but that cut the programming that we were able to do down to a third of what it previously was. So we typically are working with maybe 20,000 learners are impacted by the funding that the Secretary of State provides each year. And with that budget cut, we were down to about 5,000 people that we were able to touch. And the secretary kept going back because he recognized the value of what was being done because of your efforts. And he just kept going back saying, I want that 5.7 million. I want that 5.7 million. So I'm pleased to report that we have 5.7 million in our 2018 budget. And so we're, the budget impasse has taken a toll on the capacity of literacy programs. As our panelists were talking about, they lost their capacity. They had to kind of focus on their core services. And if literacy wasn't their core service, they took a step back from that. And we hope now that we've been successful in getting that full funding again, that will give our literacy programs around the state the confidence to come back. And we hope to get back up to that level where we're touching 20,000 lives each and every year with the literacy services that we're able to provide. So what you're doing really matters. Just keep up the effort to let the people know that you are serving, how this is possible, what funders, whether it's state funds or whether it's corporations, they need to know how these dollars are getting services to them. So it's at all levels, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Our learners need to know that, our program staff needs to know that, as Dena was saying, your instructors need to know how that, where that money comes from and how it's being utilized, and that there's accountability for it. So great job, and keep up the good work.
So we are going to get started digging into collaboration. Robin Koelsch is going to give us an overview that we can take with us to lunch to really kind of chew on. Didn't plan it. And then we'll come back later and we'll start working together pretty deeply on the concepts of connecting, advocacy, and collaboration. So with that, I will turn it over to Robin.
Danke, thank you. All right, so I come from an education background and I'm a musician, so we're gonna talk to each other and get up and do some stuff. So just know that. I know that there's been a lot of words coming at you, which is great, and they were really important words, but hopefully we can share some words now together. So you already know that. We talked a little bit about our goals for today, and we're gonna focus before lunch on the first part of this, so gaining a shared language around collaboration and the various types of collaboration to pursue. So interestingly, in the panel, when they were talking about collaboration, I think they were talking about some really high-level stuff. And I think the same way we're thinking about how advocacy can be just you being a champion for your folks, collaboration can be something different too. So let's open up our minds to what that looks like. And they were talking about Chance the Rapper, and I didn't even plan it, but so this definition was a collaboration between my colleagues and I to come up with what we thought would be a good, just overall definition of collaboration. So I'll read it to you. Collaboration is the mutually beneficial and well-defined relationship entered into by two or more organizations to achieve common goals. So I hope we can all be on board with that pretty general definition. And then the quote is from Chance the Rapper, so you know it's true. Collaboration leads to creativity. So I think that if we keep that in mind as we're going through and how we can create different things with our work together, we are stronger together, then we're gonna have some great success. So we already talked about your worksheet. Just a reminder that you have that first page of your worksheet that you got when you came in. I hope that it's busy now, that you've gotten like some notes and some things are on it. If not, no stress, but I encourage you to start thinking more about what those answers might be to those questions and prompts, because it will become more and more important as you continue to see me throughout this afternoon. All right, we already saw each other. Welcome back. So that's from your break. So before we go to lunch, we're gonna gain some shared language, complete a short activity, which you have hopefully a worksheet in front of you called Types of Collaboration Activity Worksheet. And then we'll have a little bit of time to reflect on some of what we're talking about now. and what the morning has brought for us. So, I want somebody else to read these definitions, but we're going to have 3 types of collaboration we're going to go over, and the first one is resource sharing. So who's brave to just bust it out and read it loud and proud? Yes, proud person.
Organizations, typically those working in the same or similar program areas, share vocabulary and best practices.
Pretty straightforward, right? And I'm willing to bet that some of you have done this just kind of naturally, right? Like it's happened, you're kind of doing it anyways. But this helps us put a name to it. I would even argue that what was happening in our panel today was a version of resource sharing. It was one-sided, that you were asking some questions and getting some answers, but they were sharing their resources and their ideas and their best practices of what they know. So this is just a way to do that more intentionally with organizations or an organization. In terms of like another way to think about this, is like, it's like a first date. It's like you went out for some coffee and you're like, let's just get to know each other and see what's what. And like, maybe it's just coffee and that ends there and that's cool that you knew that person, or maybe it moves on to something else. But so that's resource sharing. Any questions on that before we continue? Pretty straightforward, right? Great. Next, who's another brave person? Oh my God, I thought your hand was up. Just do it because your hand was sort of up. Can you read that? So it's like you're steady dating and you're sort of into, like you could wear your comfy clothes. So this is like, I have a great program, you have a great program. How about you work with my constituents after I do so we can impact them with our great programs. You do what you do and I do what I do and it's just gonna be awesome together. Or can you come in and like be a guest speaker in my program? Because I think it would be really helpful for my staff to hear you speak or for my constituents, students, whatever that might be, to hear what you have to say. So that's cooperation. For my visual learners, I really like the image that I chose, which is the relay race, right? The passing of the baton. That's essentially what's happening when you're doing this kind of collaboration. Cool? Questions? Great. Construction, one more brave person. Nobody from here has done it yet. Yeah, girl. Shortest definition, most complicated type of collaboration. So this is like, you're committed, you're having a baby, it's happening, right? You've created something new. You were working together to create something new. And so I think the way that the panel was talking about a lot of their collaboration opportunities was this way. So, and as Brenda was saying, like, it's hard and it takes a long time and you need to be really honest. And those things are true, which is why construction can be where we often jump to at first. We're so excited and like in this room, you're like, oh my God, and then we'll do this thing and then I'll create this thing and it's gonna be awesome. But are you ready to be married to somebody? Right? Essentially, like and don't get me wrong, like sometimes you meet somebody and you guys get married, like, and it's great and you live happily ever after and it works out really well, but that's not everybody, right? So just be thinking about that as we're moving on and talking about different ways to work together, that you can get here, but I don't know if starting here is maybe your best bet. I don't wanna if you're super excited, get excited and do it, for sure, but just know that those are my 2 cents, said the pregnant lady. Okay. So now we're going to do a short activity around the types of collaboration, because I think it's really important that, especially as literacy folks, you probably do too, that we have a shared language and that we have developed this vocabulary together so we're talking about it in the same way. Thank you, everybody, for participating in that. I heard some really interesting conversations, and I loved hearing how you all were justifying what you came up with. So before we break for lunch, please be looking at that worksheet of that page 1 of your worksheet and start filling it out because we're going to use it when we get back. Also, if you look at the whiteboard over here, this whiteboard is going to help us later during the convocation too. So if you're thinking about what's on your worksheet, jot down your name, your organization, and either an asset or a need for space over here so that folks can find you as we're going to start working together. Cool? Great. Thank you all so much.
So while you're at lunch, please visit our member fair. Get to know some of the organizations that are here. Have a great time. Food is set up in the welcome area. And then we'll see you back here at 1 when we will be doing a giveaway for Bill Murray at the CSO and Al Gore at the Illinois Humanities Festival. So you want to make sure you're here to win. Thank you.
Okay. Mostly what I am is incredibly inspired, humbled, grateful, and proud to be standing in front of you today for your endurance, for your inspiration, for the work that you brought, the work that you did, the work that you continue to do. So John Green, who is a young adult author, many of you are smiling in recognition because he's pretty great, has said that the reading of every book is always a collaboration between the author and the reader who are making the story up together at the same time. And that's what happened today. Whether you spoke, I heard all of you talking, whether you spoke up here or just to each other, if you listened, you are part of the story that the CLA is making every single day, which we make for you as much as we know how, but more to the point, we make with you. And from you, we make it. This is where meaning is made, where collaboration is formed, why we exist, why we went from a little volunteer meetup with coffee and donuts a long time ago in River North to a symposium that packs the room. Some of you come year after year. Hopefully I'll be back next year. This is not the end, nor is it the beginning. We are here every day, year-round. Except in December, we take a week off to go off and get refreshed for you guys. But we hope that we will see you in this space, that we will see you on the community board, that we will see you, that we will hear you, that we will continue to listen to and learn from you every day as we go forward. So, this is my favorite part. If you are on the CLA team and you made this happen today, stand up on your feet. Jen, Allison, Jamie, all the rest of you in the room. All right. If you spoke in front of the room today, if you led an amazing session, if you were on a panel, on your feet. Stay on your feet, all you people who are already up. Awesome. Okay. If you heard about the CLA or the Literary Center for the first time, and this is your very first time in the space, on your feet, please. Join the standees. Yes, extra claps for you guys. Welcome. If you are a member of a CLA member organization or you work for one, on your feet, please. Yes! All right. If you just love literacy in Chicago, have been here before, and we're so excited to come back, please join everyone. You should all now be standing. All of you. Okay. 3 things. Put your hands together for yourselves, because you deserve it. You worked hard today. Okay. Put your hands together for each other, even more importantly. Okay. Yes. Take your hands apart, leave this room, put a drink in one and a brownie in the other, and we will see you out there. Thank you all so much.